Eric. Okay. First, I want to respond on the helicopter thing. I in no way meant to indicate that helicopters are the answer to the problem. It certainly made an impact and made the news and is a way of dealing with educating some of the biking community to the park means business when it says don't ride on trails that are posted because they're sensitive. Secondly, I'm concerned that what is going to be taken to PAC apparently is just on new trails. And that's not how this committee was way back originally asked for. What was asked for was the current trails and the safety concerns and the conflicts on them. And I think to ignore that taken to PAC would be a mistake.
Mimi, I have to clarify. From the very beginning, the focus of this group has been how to open up new trails and land bank properties. I think what we have recognized is that it's impossible to talk about new trails and land bank properties without also dealing with issues of existing trails. But the PAC will be addressing trails within existing parks, as well as in looking at how to expand access to land bank parks. And point is well taken that those are two different buckets of issues. And it's not the same conversation. But I do want to clarify that is what the intent.
Okay, I just want to make sure there were two things that are going to park, not just new land bank.
Great. Okay, Amelia, thanks for your patience. And then Morris is next, Jim and Simone. We haven't heard from Simone yet.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. I wanted to respond to Christina, who wisely is looking for a central idea to take away to address things to the PAC. And her reformulation of what the central idea is how do you build new trails and who gets to use them? Well, you know, the devil's in the details here. So say you've got a hypothetical park and you're going to build a trail. The planning department, the trail building department, is currently set up to build narrow multi-use trails, and they've bought all these Sutter 3000 trail builders used to construct the narrow trail. So where do you make the trail? Well, you got to look at the environment first. You got to assess your habitats, your erosion, your flora, and then if the environment is not going to be harmed by putting the trail there, then you put the trail there. So who gets to go on it? Well, in some cases, it might be fine to have that be a bike-only trail, but how do you decide that? This is a very complex process. That's why I'm thinking a regularized framework for this has got to be in place, and the PAC should be evaluating that. It's going to be very complicated otherwise. You'll get this piecemeal approach. When you consider the bicyclists' requests, demands for access in Briones, where there would be displacement of other types of users, particularly equestrians, it's very important that that be decided too. It goes beyond simply building new trails in new locations. Pleasanton Ridge, I understand they took a fire road and narrowed it to accommodate bicycle use. So I do hope that the PAC will bear these things in mind and keep it transparent. People become alarmed. The McCosker situation is alarming. And anyway, that's some off-the-cuff responses to Christina's desire to crystallize things. Thank you.
Okay, Morris and Jim and Simone are next. Again, if you could keep your comments relatively concise. We've sort of been around once almost, and we have about 15 more minutes on this, or I'm sorry, about 20 more minutes on this section. So go ahead, Morris. You're still muted, Morris. There you are.
There are a couple of things I wanted to emphasize. One is that in contrast to what Norman stated, this group was convened in the very beginning to consider the fact that in 25 years, there have been the development of 15 miles of new trails, and that, land bank properties are being opened up, and that in the process of opening up those trails, there needs to be a process for doing so and guidelines for doing so to determine the issues that the district manager mentioned, which was, how do we develop these new trails? Who gets to use them? How do we make sure they're safe? How do we make sure everybody has access? And this process came out of what happened at McCosker, where the Park District acquired a piece of land, held extensive public hearings over a couple of years, developed user proposals from those meetings, narrowed them down to several draft proposals, and then held hearings about those, and then selected a preferred alternative, and then held hearings about those, and then the PAC approved them, and then the board considered them. And at the very end, it was derailed by threats of a lawsuit over a trail that would have connected this new parcel with the existing parklands, the route of which hadn't even been determined yet. There was a wide trail corridor, but the exact route had not been determined yet. But a lawsuit was threatened, and the Park District had to delay the construction of that trail now for several years because of the fact that there was a time-sensitive grant that was a multi-million-dollar grant for rehabilitating a creek in that shed that had to come first. They did not want to lose that grant. And so they delayed this trail that would have benefited everybody, especially equestrians who otherwise have absolutely no access to that trail. And the process that the Park District developed over decades for ensuring there was public access, ensuring there was environmental considerations that were all followed and considered, was totally derailed. And so they said, okay, we have to have something like a trail user working group so that this does not happen again. And that's where we are today, still. And we need to be able to come forward with new trails so that in the next 25 years, we don't build 15 miles of new trails, but we're able to open up a lot of these new parklands where appropriate, where restrictions do not forbid it, to the use of those communities in those areas by the equestrians, by the bicyclists, by the hikers, by the runners, by the dog walkers, and everybody else who lives in those areas without recreating the battles that we've had in the existing parks. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Morris. Okay, Jim, Simone, and then one more comment from Norman. You're up next. Okay, Jim, go ahead.
Thank you. I will try to be brief here. I guess part of the remaining question is where from here? I know I'm hearing PAC, and I've attended a few PAC meetings. They cover a lot of topics, and they meet once a month. And I know some of us have said, let's talk about the real meat and potatoes early. But we did a long 1.5 year process, and bless everybody for hanging in there. But we really didn't, until I think 20 minutes of the last meeting, start to talk about issues. So we haven't, in a way, I would give this process, if I were a teacher, an incomplete. But so what happens next? Because we have no real formal process. I mean, I am curious if, I think these are good people in the PAC, but they meet once a month, they cover a lot of topics, and I know there's this real need to get to some resolution. So I will say I'm just have some questions about where this is going, in a way that we actually get to some resolutions and solutions and some looking after every trail, every user group that's here. So I don't know, that's a remaining question for me. Thank you.
I hear what you're saying, Jim. Thanks so much for raising that up. We're trying today to do as much as we can of coming back together and feeling complete to whatever extent we can, to hand it off to the next planning group to pick up. So I'm sure that for some of you, this hasn't been a completely satisfactory result, but I think we've navigated a lot of different issues, and we've come up with a lot of different solutions, and maybe the consensus isn't there around all of the solutions. Today, we're really just trying to make sure that we feel comfortable with articulating the key issues to pass along. And we have a lot of documentation around different perspectives on those issues that we can share with the Park Advisory Committee as well. So Simone, I want to turn it to you, and I'm inviting anybody else who hasn't spoken up yet, how you're feeling about the process, and also what's coming next, if you want to contribute. Also, before I turn the mic over to you, Simone, just appreciating all of the comments in the chat. Let's keep them respectful, and but definitely appreciating your articulating your points of view there. As I mentioned, we're going to be capturing all of that as well. So thanks for that. Okay, Simone, thank you for your patience.
Thanks, Lou. I guess I don't need to rehash anything that anyone else has said, but I do want to note, maybe this is more about the composition of the pack, but I truly feel like the conversation for future generations and for the next and younger generations has been missing from this trail user working group. I know that members were invited, but it sometimes can be harder to be included. And there's a lot of very strong voices who have extremely long history. I've been acquainted, but now having been in this conversation for 1 year, but I know that it's been going on for at least 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. I'm sure there's been conflicts agreed. So I guess I would hope that the PAC takes up this issue and really helps to focus on what the future of East Bay Parks will look like in a inclusive way, and also how future generations will be recreating. I think that's really important. And I guess I also want to point out that we really appreciate East Bay Park staff and all the work that you've been doing. And I hope that whatever the PAC recommendations are, that it makes it easier for your amazing staff to do their jobs, and just to be able to build more trails. We know that's a need. So thank you.
Simone, because you raised the issue of the future users and their participation, we were hoping to get voices included in this process that could offer that perspective. And so if you have any thoughts about ways that we can better reach, better involve, better engage, what would attract folks who are maybe not, this isn't top on their agenda. It's a great opportunity to learn how to advocate and to educate and all those things. So any thoughts you have on that would be probably helpful.
I guess I might add that of course I know my background is in urban planning. I know the people that show up to public meetings tend to be in the older generation, and it's because you have that's a great thing. We work around the region and to try to help with issues like this. There's no other region that has this severe, well, I guess maybe Marin County has this severe of an issue with bike use that we have experienced as a multi-use trail. I advocate for all users, but we can definitely share if best practices. There's a couple of different regional working groups and that work on trails, and with the Together Bay Area, the Open Space Council. So I can check in and see if I can hear of anything. And I'm sure that there's great perspectives from this group as well.
Thank you. Okay. Norman? And I think that might, if there's no other folks raising hands, we can probably move on to our next agenda item. So go ahead.
I'll be brief. This trail user working group was created because of the issue about multi-use trails being constructed or proposed in the parks, and how that was going to be addressed in a way that reflected the Park District Master Plan and the fact of the inherent conflict with multi-use narrow trails. And yes, we talked about opening up land bank properties, but that was not the focus, because if that were the focus, bank properties discussed with all the constraints and opportunities that they provided, what the conditions were for their acquisition to the Park District, and how that would affect how trails could be designed and constructed within those park units. That was never done. And if the PAC is going to go forward on this issue in that sense, or with that purpose, then there needs to be a lot of information provided to people about all the land bank properties and all the conditions and constraints that relate to each of those land bank properties and the environmental issues related to that.
So in addition to helping us focus on the issues that you all think are really critical for the next phase of work, I also appreciate, as Norman just did, and Simone and others, about the process that you'd like to see occur. So I think this is good input for the district, so that that next phase of effort can really address what we all would like to see happen, and also the type of process and inclusivity that we'd like to see as well. I want to return back to, real quickly, since I don't see any other hands at the moment, to the notions that Morris had, would like to, and Morris, I wonder if you wouldn't mind just, seeing if there's anything additional we can discuss around camping, around the regional connectivity and enforcement. I think some of these things have been talked about already, so maybe we don't need to go through all of them. And shared use of trails, obviously a really central issue that has been talked about a lot. But what about specifically about camping? Would you like to see us maybe talk a little bit more about, and see if there's any further direction or consensus? So Morris, can you help us with that? Can you unmute? Morris, are you there? That was an invitation to you to, there you go.
I'm sorry, I missed the question. What was it?
Sorry, now I was muted. Earlier you had articulated a few things about topics that you wanted us to come back around to. We have a few moments, not many, but you talked about camping, the regional trail connectivity, enforcement, and shared use of trails. I think we've covered a lot of those. You were speaking early in the conversation today, but what about camping specifically did you want to see if we could have a little bit more direction on?
Well, okay, and one that I didn't mention was also pilot studies. There was a significant group of people who thought that pilot studies, camping, and regional trail access were things that they strongly opposed or would block consensus on. They had a 5 or a 6 in the survey on those issues. And those are things that we didn't really talk about, that, hardly came up. I think they were in there because one person during the conversation had suggested them as issues, but they weren't things that we spent time discussing. And those things, it seems to me people are voting against them because they're making assumptions about them. Like when we briefly mentioned this at, I think, the August meeting, we talked about the regional trail connectivity. People turned out were opposing it because they thought that consideration of connections for regional trails would trump environmental considerations, and that the Park District, that they thought that meant that the Park District should establish regional trail connections at the expense of the environment, which wasn't the intent of anybody who was suggesting that. And so I think clarifying, that camping is an important thing in regional parks, clarifying that pilot studies do not mean that we're forever committed to, continuing an experiment. Those should be really things that just by changing the wording slightly, we could all agree on. The multi-use trail thing obviously is a bigger bone of contention and will require much more discussion. But I think it's also possible there that we could agree that everybody should have access to trails and that it should be safe and the provision should be made so that everybody has reasonable trails to recreate on, and that everybody feels safe on those trails in addition. I don't see why we can't agree on that, on all four of those issues. So that's all.
Thanks, Morris. And let me just invite those of you who would like to respond to what Morris talked about, please do so in the chat so we can get your sense of those of you who might have voted against regional trail connectivity because you felt that that trumped environmental concerns, or maybe not. Just clarify what your position was on that in particular might be useful for making us feel more whole on that topic, as well as camping. I think we've been hearing that shared use of trails is a central issue going forward, as well as pilot studies as an approach to figuring out what can be effective. Let me recognize Linus. You've been really patient and quiet so far, but this is your opportunity now, and we'd love to hear what you have.
Thanks, Lou. And I'm sorry, I was a little late to the meeting as well. I apologize for not being able to be here right at the top. But with that said, with respect to camping, I'm curious. It's probably a question of Brian and Naoma, but we have begun to experience a lot of campsites adjacent to John Muir Land Trust, and including trails that are shared by EBRPD and so forth. So there's a whole movement through Hip Camp and the like, where folks are opening up their properties to camping, advertising online. So in terms of available trails and shared use, we're rapidly becoming Sweden or something. Hike through anybody's field and camp the night. And I'm curious, is there some insight as to county regulatory requirements of people running campsites? EBRPD may supersede that. We feel as though it's overburdening some of the trails, and folks just departing from the trail, deciding that's a gate and I'll go through it. And so public passage to for-profit campsites, which is sort of a private inurement issue, and on and on. So as we talk about how the Park District handles it, there's a whole other burgeoning issue with respect to the popularity of camping and private lands adjacent. Any insight? Tell me how to solve that one.
Well, this is a trails user working group, so we have a separate camping task force.
Okay, great. Well, please do send the invite. I'll be there.
I actually don't know if we've been experiencing much of that. That's a good question. I think we should talk offline on. I can do some research and we can talk offline to see what's going on there.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
it's happening. Appreciate the help.
I'm scanning the faces and not seeing any hands waving at me at the moment, or any hands raised at the moment. So I think if we can move on, we will, and maybe perhaps end our meeting a little bit early today. I want to save a little time for just some logistics and housekeeping and acknowledgements to everybody, and a discussion about what maybe we could do to honor the group, those of you who would like to participate in some kind of group activity afterwards. This portion of the agenda, then we're turning towards documentation of our process, and we've sent out a couple of drafts of the summary document, and I guess I'd like Devin to step up now and give an overview of the district's approach to finalizing that document and entertain any discussion on that the group would like to have. So Devin,
if maybe before we do leave this last topic, there's just a couple things that I just wanted to touch on real quick. One is the notion of environmental review. All of our projects are subject to CEQA. Certainly we can, and there have been, disagreements about what level of CEQA might be necessary, and the studies are there. But we as staff feel that we're always complying with CEQA and doing thorough environmental review. We also really try and increasingly, always could be better in terms of our stakeholder outreach, and that's inviting stakeholders early and often. So we've got a number of projects in the pipeline that I hear reference that the park district's doing a number of things, and we're not necessarily implementing things. We've been in this study process, and there's been public meetings and environmental review and the like throughout. So Jim, Norman, I'm going to be reaching out to you to talk about some of these things specifically, Southern Los Trumpets, Land Use Plan, and others, because these are, from my perspective, good plans, really deep, thorough environmental review, really well-rationed reasons why the trails that are included in there. We can get outside and we can go walk them if that's what's needed. It's been a pretty thorough and public process, and you can drive up Bollinger Canyon Road and see signs about it all over. So anyways, we'll be following up on that. With regard to the Wildcat Flow Trail, again, this was a proposal that came from the community. They came to our board, brought petitions, and the board members simply asked, is there anything there? So that's where we're at. It's like looking at, okay, is this something that even could feasibly be implemented? And before we could even, start initiating studies, and of course, it's well down the road. We have to do lots of community engagement, all the environmental review, and everything else, just to give the information to our board to decide then whether or not it's a trail that they would want to approve or not. So, I haven't even necessarily directed our staff to begin working on it because I don't know if it's a concept that our board is even willing to consider. So, the idea that we've gotten ahead on that or anything else is just, we haven't. There's a proposal that came from the community, and we're just seeing, is it something that's worth studying? So anyways, and then just the last thing I'll just say is, you all, we've been in this conversation about sort of the planning, what comes up to it. This is the tip of the iceberg. What we as staff have to deal with is actually going and getting the permits, the environmental permits from all the regulatory agencies, which requires much more detailed studies and much more, further negotiation and lots of restrictions. Once a trail or a plan is approved. So we're struggling with how to move things forward on that end as well. So with that, I appreciate the conversation. I think all good comments, and I think this conversation has really, I think, succinctly kind of encapsulated, what I think is really, it's a fundamental issue at the Park District. We have a dual mandate: protect resources and provide for public access, and there's inherent tension in that. And I think that's what we're seeing here. And I agree that we need to collectively identify a process by which we can work through those decisions to balance those two mandates. So thanks again, everybody.
All right, Devin, before you step up, it looks like Joseph has his hand up, and we do have a little time to acknowledge. Go ahead, Joseph.
Just one quick comment, Lou. Thanks, Brian, for all that. I just wanted to leave the group with, we are in the behavior change business, whether we like it or not. I don't know if we should have had a psychiatrist as part of this group, because we're trying to make sure we all just get along in the park, right? And so without just having our own agenda and trying to think broader about our collective community and how we can all get along, I really think that pilots are going to be required as we introduce new lands and open up the land bank. So if I'm not clear why pilots are not a good way forward, I just want to get some clarity around that, because I just don't know how you try something, perfect it, and then roll it out to a community. And if someone's against pilots, which I think I heard, I just want to make sure that we can talk to those people.
I don't know if anybody wants to briefly respond to that. What I heard was, I think there was a concern that once a pilot program is implemented, that it's difficult to pull it back. That would be a main concern. So, and I can't say, maybe the district has some experience with trying a particular management strategy and then evaluating it, and deciding maybe it didn't meet all the needs and objectives, and then, rescinding it or trying something different. But I believe that's sort of the concern. And, so I think you articulated the pro pretty well there, Joseph. Thank you. Okay, Adela, that prompted a response from you.
Yeah, as a former public works director for a city, I just wanted to say that, we used pilot projects, and we had, pilot projects where things continued on, and pilot projects where we found out, no, that's like not a good idea, and we pulled it back. And it's just a matter of getting the word out that this is a pilot and making sure folks know. And so I'm a big proponent of pilots. That's it.
Alrighty. Well, just in respect for time, why don't we ask Devin to go ahead now and give us an update on the documentation for this process, the handoff to Park Advisory Committee, and then we'll talk about final steps here. So go ahead, Devin.
Thank you, Lou. So as you may remember, back in November, we sent out the public review draft of the summary of goals and solutions document. And that was our attempt at the time to capture what we had heard. That was our main objective, was to capture what this group has discussed. And if you read deeply in the report, deep into the appendices, you'll see how much wisdom and knowledge and experience there is in this group. So we've wrestled with the decision as staff because we received so many comments from you, certainly on the survey document and the solutions wording, but also just on how the perspectives were presented. Should we as staff revise the report along the lines of some of the suggestions we received? So time moved on. What we've chosen to do, because we've included all of those comments and suggestions in an appendix, we've essentially decided to keep the report as it was drafted back in November. What we are going to add are a few things. We're going to add in the appendix all the letters that were sent after Thanksgiving and into December by some of the members of the user group. There was a flurry of different letters and emails, so we're going to include those. We're going to include some of the notes from Sean and I had one-on-one and two-on-one conversations with all the members who gave presentations. We were trying to figure out what should the last meeting look like and how should this process wrap up. So we got good information from those. So we're going to include a section about those conversations. We're going to include a new section that will summarize today's meeting. Of course, that hadn't happened yet. And then finally, we're going to change the wording of that one solution that referred to prohibiting bikes on trails less than 8 feet wide. We had changed that solution after the voting. We changed the wording of that solution after the voting, and that caused consternation. And so we're going to dial back that change, and that wording will stay as it was originally selected and people originally evaluated. But we're not going to have a new survey. We're not going to change the wording of any of the other solutions. We're going to let the document stand as it is, amendments and all, or appendices and all. So I wanted to let everyone know that, and if anyone's got strong feelings about that, we've got a little bit of time. We can hear about that. But that's where, so at some point in the next month, we'll be finishing the report and releasing it to the public.
Okay, Amelia.
Very briefly, clarification, please, Devin. So you are referring to item C7, which is the original wording was consider disallowing bicycles on trails less than 8 feet wide. Is that right?
Correct. That was the original wording, and we will reverse whatever change we made originally to that original wording, because that's what people were voting on.
Lily and Simone, and then Austin.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether, it lists the trail user working group members. And then in the introduction, it talks about the different groups that were represented. But I'm wondering how people feel about having, listing who's representing what, who's connected with which of the groups that are listed. I don't know, just for posterity.
Well, we do have a original document that had the affiliations of different folks on the group, and we could include that. It's on our website now to kind of explain who is a member. We intended to keep those lists separate because some people represent different perspectives, even as they're sitting here today. They may have been invited as part of one perspective, but they really have expertise and experience in other perspectives. So that was our thinking about keeping the list separate. We could easily put a list back in.
I would defer to whatever the whole group thinks, but to me, I thought it would be valuable, but maybe not.
Would love to hear how other people feel about it. I think Devin represented the discussions that we had about that pretty well. We didn't want to pigeonhole people into just one point of view necessarily. Simone, and then Austin, and then Morris.
Hi. Well, so I don't think that I would be doing my job if I didn't mention this, but some of you know I do work for the Bay Area Ridge Trail. And that is one of the regional trails that is looking to make connections, and that includes over 2 land banked pieces of property before we're done in the East Bay. So you guys know we got one of our longest connected stretches is here that you guys enjoy. And I know that was one of the, I think that the comment was like prioritizing regional connectivity was one of the issue areas that came up in red in the report. And the Ridge Trail was envisioned at the same time that the Bay Trail was envisioned. So this is over 30 years ago. There have been ample plans in place. There's a lot of different public involvement and a lot of collaboration throughout the entire Bay Area to make these things happen. And I guess, I don't know that I wrote in a letter to disagree with that. And I didn't have a meeting to disagree with that because we weren't asked to present. But I guess, that's something that I definitely do have a problem with. I think that was one of the points that seemed like it required more discussion, that maybe there was maybe it needed clarifications and people had voted for different reasons why they disagreed. And I don't like that is in red, that's one of the top most controversial parts moving forward. But I know that that's because part of that is my job. So I wanted to put that out there and just say that I wanted to put that out there to the group. Yeah.
Simone, this is Sean. Hi, thanks for that. And we do remember that. And I think, unless there's any major disagreement on that from the group, our intent was to remove the reference to the Ridge Trail. It wouldn't change the nature of the recommendation when speaking of, because there are other regional trail connections such as the National Skyline Trail, the Juan Bautista de Anza Regional Trail. There's a number of them that are also regionally important, and that's what we're talking about. So if that's okay with everyone else, we'll remove it, or reference to the Ridge Trail. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you. And I think that was in line with other comments that had happened, that just the reference had been of the specific name had been removed. My comment is still that it's a shame that it's in red, and I wish we would have had a chance to talk it out. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Simone. Okay, Austin, then Morris.
Yeah, just in regards to the materials being forwarded to the PAC, the mountain bike presentation that was given, we provided feedback that the notes and summary of that presentation were not exactly accurate, and we provided clarifications, and I want to make sure that those are included in the final report. Is there some confirmation that that's going to be changed, or can we look at it before it's presented to the PAC?
Right now, Austin, those comments are showing up in the appendix with other comments. They're mixed in either solution by solution or comments about the actual presentation. So they're currently in the report, but they're in the appendix. So I think what I'm hearing you say is you'd like to see those changes made to the text itself. And
yeah, my guess is that a PAC member is going to review the summary of the presentation and not necessarily dig into the appendix. And
yeah, that's fair. Thank you for that. We'll look closely at that and we can get back to you about it.
That was suggesting that each group that made a presentation reviewed the section. It was our hope that that had been done by all the presenters as to ensure, as Austin just mentioned, that we were capturing accurately, the scope of what was presented as well as the information. So if we're hoping that was done, and there's been an yeah, yes, Adele, to make the corrections in the main document. I think we're hearing that direction from the group here. Yeah. Okay, Morris, and then Kathy. Morris, you need to unmute, Morris, please.
Yeah, I just unmuted. So I have to say that I am a bit disappointed that we didn't get to clarify the wording on some of those things. For example, we could have easily agreed on the section that the Ridge Trail thought was important, I believe, with just a minor change in wording. With the proposal that you've changed back to the original wording, I think if we had voted on the new wording, it would have received more approval than the original wording, and we would have been closer to consensus. It's a pity that we don't have that opportunity. I know that we're not going to change the process right now, so I'll just say that without belaboring the point. I also think that it is important to make clear, if we're going to include the organizations that people are members of, that it's clear that they're not necessarily speaking for those organizations or saying this is the position of those organizations, because I know in a number of cases people have strong opinions of their own, and while they're members of the Sierra Club or members of Metropolitan Horsemen's Association or members of other organizations that are listed in the document, there are plenty of other people in those organizations who have differing opinions. And to represent them in the report as being so-and-so from this organization has a strong implication, unless it's explicitly pointed out, but that's not the case, that they're representing those organizations, and that should not be the case.
That was one of our considerations for separating out the names from the organizations for exactly that reason too. Thanks, Morris. Kathy?
Oh, I just wanted to say towards the end on a positive note that, I mean, this is really why we're all here. This is a picture from the Bay Area Ridge Trail, a recently completed section that I took last week. And I think that we have to remember that we really all love the parks, and that's why we're doing this.
Thanks, Kathy. That's beautiful. Is that you?
No, I took the picture. That's a woman who climbed up Tolman Peak in Garin, which I highly recommend. Garin has amazing, unknown to me areas.
Wow, you could copyright that photo, and yeah, it's beautiful. All right, thanks. We hope there'll be some other positive messages before we close today. Thanks, Kathy. Norman?
I have to respond to Morris here. I'm here as the representative of the Sierra Club, fully authorized to speak on behalf of the Sierra Club.
All right, well, Devin, I don't know if that's clear enough direction for you. Yeah, okay, I'm seeing a nod. Morse, we can't hear you.
I just have to say that although Norman may believe that he's, and maybe and perhaps is, the representative of the Sierra Club, as Luana said, that's not what we've been led to believe. And also, it's there are plenty of Sierra Club leaders that I know, hike leaders and others, who are shocked by the position that the Sierra Club has taken in these discussions. And I look back at the history of some of these issues and came upon the minutes of the East Bay Area Trails Council from 2006, where Norman suggested that, and this gets back to where somebody was saying people fighting old battles. But back there in 2006, Norman suggested at a meeting of the Trails Council that all consideration of opening new trails to bicycles should be halted immediately. This was via what was then called the Trails List process. And somebody at that meeting raised the question, does Norman represent the Sierra Club in this, or is he speaking as an individual? And somebody else from the Sierra Club said, well, I'll look into that and report back to the next meeting. And actually the next few minutes did not return to that subject at all. But the question of whether people represent the organizations that they belong to is a valid question, and it should never be confused when in fact there are various viewpoints within all organizations. For example, the Sierra Club on a national basis has been very encouraging and very solicitous of mountain bikers. Very different from the local attitude, if indeed Norman does represent the Sierra Club. And it's worth pointing out that when Sierra Club, this is not an attack on anybody, when the Sierra Club did in fact misrepresent by a post by Norman in the Yodeler and on their website, and Norman said that the bicyclists have asked for all trails to be open to mountain bikes, and the East Bay Regional Park District is in the process of doing this. There was no way to respond to that misassertion on their website or in the Yodeler or on Amelia's Trail User Working Group, which banned me as a member. It got so far as to the point where at the PAC meeting the week before last, one of the members said, I understand that the Park District is opening up all narrow trails to multi-use. And she had to be reassured by other members that in fact that wasn't the case. But that misinformation had been spread. And it's very, very abusive to our process. And I don't mean this as an attack on anybody, but it's unfortunate that we've gone through these things.
I don't want to get into a back and forth on this.
I'm very upset by this attack on me and on the Sierra Club, which is being done intentionally to try to discredit the Sierra Club. I'm not going to try to respond to this. This is outrageous that at the end of this meeting, at the end of this process, I'm having this kind of attack made on me personally and on the Sierra Club. And this has got to stop if we're going to get anywhere with this.
Thanks for responding. I don't want to more. Let's just.
I just want to say this is not.
There's so much that was a lie by Morris that's wrong, incorrect, factually inaccurate, and intentionally done to discredit the Sierra Club. And I'm not going to try point by point at the end of this meeting like to that.
There was an intentional post to discredit the bicyclists, which was totally.
That's simply false.
And I'm not
it's false, Morris.
Club, and I'm not.
Please mute him or something, because this is just outrageous. I'm not going to have everybody listen to this when he's making misstatements of fact.
Okay. All right. I do think these are important issues. I'm sorry that we are confronting them right here at this point in our meeting. This is a good example of why we were a little hesitant to connect people's names to organizations, because we weren't clear who was authorized to speak on behalf of which organization. And we wanted to acknowledge that these organizations do have voices in the process, but we didn't want to just assume that people sitting on the council, on the working group, we're actually representing the full membership of those organizations. So this is exactly kind of why we wanted to avoid that. So some of you may have full blessings of your groups to put their name on this, and others of you might be in a less explicit position. So I think our default was to just pull back from a one-on-one kind of identification and just acknowledge both the participation of the individuals on the group and the groups themselves. So I think that's why we are where we are right now. I don't know, Kathy, were you going to speak to this as well?
Yes.
Just
Yes.
briefly, I want to give everybody a chance to respond, but I also want to move on.
I really want to say this, and in no way am I wanting conflict. And I have been a member of the Sierra Club since 1983. We had one of these kinds of differences of opinions about dogs. It was either the Albany Bulb or North Point Isabel. And I and about 5 or 6 other people in the Sierra Club got together and wrote a letter supporting dogs to the yodeler, and it was never printed. So with all respect, and I totally appreciate the work you've done over the years, incredibly valuable. I don't think it's been a transparent process within the organization. That's all.
Thank you for bringing these up. I know that this will live on beyond our meeting today. And I'm sorry for any hurt feelings along these lines, but yeah, as I mentioned before, I think this was why we didn't want to do the one-to-one identification. Devin, I don't know if I can't see if you're still there. We were going to move into just a reminder of where we go from here and to poll the group to see if there was any interest in coming together, in an outdoor situation to celebrate the work of the group. So I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. I saw Jim's comment there about the intended focus of the group. I think, Jim, we've summarized, the messaging to the PAC. That was sort of the main goal. And, you'll see the notes that we produce out of this that Maria's going to help us create. So at this point, before we wrap up, the last question to the group, to open to the group, is we'd always intended before COVID, the gathering of the group. I mean, at one point, we'd hoped to have one of the meetings in a park. Because of COVID, it just couldn't happen. It seems that it's possible now with the Omicron surge kind of receding somewhat for people who feel comfortable meeting outside to gather. And we do have gifts for everyone and to thank them for their participation over the last year. So really, this is a chance to talk about, would you like to gather again? One more time, voluntarily, of course, at a park, and get to receive sort of our thanks to you in person.
Anybody can just sort of chime in here, I think, if you'd like. It's the moment's gift. Okay. It is odd that we've worked really hard together and we've never met in person. So yeah, if those of you who are interested, just speak up and let us know. Kind of, I'll see if we get a critical mass, so to speak, of people, of numbers of people.
Sure. Why don't you ask everyone to put up their hands who wants to do it?
Okay. Raise your hand. Yep. And either raise your hand electronically or there we go. Okay. And I'm seeing a majority of hands raised among the group that's assembled here. Maybe somebody's not willing to state a no, but don't want to. Yes, let's break bread. make sure it's accessible, of course.
Of course.
And some suggestion about where we might go. Devin, are you taking suggestions, or did you have in mind a location that's comfortable for us to be?
Lou, I think what I would suggest is, because we'll want to get together and make this, as Luana said, an opportunity to break bread. But I think we can also use it as another opportunity to kind of help us move this conversation along as it begins to transition over to the PAC. So I think it would be good for us as staff to think about, where would a good beneficial location be to where we can, talk about some of these issues, and something that's relevant, and we can perhaps have some materials available, or something like that, so we can do a bit of social and a bit of thank you, and then also kind of, help tee up the conversation as we let us discuss it a bit. You will require to be dressed, Linus, but other than that, you would totally be welcome to come as you are. So give us a chance to sort of think about what that might look like, and we'll get back to you.
And just, I'm not tying you down to anything, but what time of the year and what time of the day? Are you thinking a lunch or a dinner? Are you thinking April, May? Are you thinking next weekend? Super Bowl weekend, what?
I mean, I would say just off the cuff, like I say, we'll want to be able to report on what this next phase looks like with the PAC. So, April is a nice time. I mean, I keep hoping it's going to rain at some point. So maybe it'll be a totally wet April, but April seems like a nice time. So let's maybe target that. And, I would suggest a lunch and, get together for an afternoon in the park.
Thank you.
And let's make sure that it is an accessible location, so we can be inclusive there. And okay.
Yeah.
Any other comments on that particular business casual, trail casual?
Okay. One of the other reasons I'm asking is I have connections to Yeti and others. So if we were to do something in a park, maybe I can have a brand come and bring chairs, a cooler, right? I can maybe help. So maybe Brian, if you want to put together a planning committee, once you decide on what the it is, let me know, and maybe I can add a little more value.
I appreciate that, Joseph. We'll be reaching out.
Seeing a bunch of hands. This is just left over from the voting. Okay. Austin will bring his bike. Wonderful. All right. So all kidding aside, I don't want to minimize the conflict that we just had. I think, obviously those are feelings that we're not going to be able to resolve right now. I think in the spirit of coming together and appreciating one another for being here and being vulnerable in these conversations and being strong advocates for safety and for conservation and for recreation and access, I think we've done a really credible job of that. And we wish the Park Advisory Committee a great deal of luck with taking this from ideas and concepts into some policy recommendations. And just as I kind of, I'll turn it back over to Brian for some closing comments. Really appreciate everybody's mostly respectful and supportive input and conversations. It's been a really, I think a lot of information has been shared, and appreciate all of that. And thanks for the district for providing this forum. And so Brian,
thanks,
I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. And first off, I just want to say thank you to Lou. Folks may not know, but Lou is now retired and willingly came back to help facilitate these last couple meetings sort of out of retirement. So we're very grateful to him to sort of, helping us kind of get this conversation, this phase of the conversation over the finish line. I've been at the Park District here for 17 years now. And I've been here in the chief seat for 5 years. And the one thing that I think everybody agrees upon, and this is both internally and externally, is that we can do things better. I think we can do things better in terms of how we engage with the public. We can do things better with making our parks more accessible. We can do things better in terms of how we work with communities of color and other communities. We can do things better in our natural resource stewardship and our cultural resource stewardship and in our trail planning. And so this is all in an interest in terms of how we do things better. Unfortunately, you know, we're government and there's processes and a lot of interested stakeholders. And I'm just hopeful that as this moves into the next phase, we'll be able to find a process by which everybody feels that their voices can be heard, that they're involved at the appropriate times, that the environmental review is thorough and complete, and that there's some level of trust. And I do recognize that there's been trust that has been lost over the years from, you know, whether it's various activities by the Park District or in terms of how some of our stakeholders have engaged, or and how different users just have used the parks. And I think there's frustration on all sides. So I'm hopeful that that we'll continue this conversation. I'm excited to have the PAC take it up because they are a very thoughtful group of professionals who are appointed not just by our board but others. So we're getting a sort of diversity of thought there, I hope, and I think they'll be very thoughtful. But this is all an iterative process. I mean, you know, when the direction came to us about forming a trail user working group, you know, Sean and I, Devin wasn't here yet at that point, but you know, sort of looked at each other like, geez, how in the world are we going to do that? And you know, and what do we talk about? Do we talk about existing trails? Do we talk about new trails? Do we talk about e-bikes? Do we talk about design? Do we talk about, you know, it's a big world. A lot of people think, you know, we'll just go build a new trail, and it is incredibly difficult to build a trail in sensitive habitats and that serve our users' needs and that meet the regional goals of other organizations like Ridge Trail, that you know, connect to the communities that they need to connect to, that provide access for equestrians and cyclists and hikers, and you know, and then of course the world's changing all the time. You know, skateboards and, you know, everything else, all of these issues come to the trails. So as staff, I just want to say we're really committed to trying to get it right. And you know, while it may not always seem like we appreciate the input, we do. And we hope that we can just move forward with a spirit of cooperation. So we'll find a good site for us to all get together. I'll look forward to that. Like I say, we do have projects in the pipeline, and I totally understand concerns about how transparent that is, because, you know, we might have public meetings and they happen and then we go deep into studies and it might be a while before we have another meeting or before we have another outreach. So so things can catch people by surprise. That's never our intent, but like I say, we got the next one that we have coming out will be the Southern Lost Trumpets land use plan. So so Jim, Norman, Pam, you know, others would love to get you out there and sort of take a look at it, because I you know, can anticipate what some of the discussion is going to be around that point. So anyways, again, just really deep thank you to everybody, and this has been great, and like I say, not the end of the conversation, obviously. So thanks again, everybody, and thanks to Sean and Devin and the rest of the Park District staff for really putting in a lot of good work here. So with that, I think we're adjourned, and we will be in touch soon. Like I say, I expect to see some of you on Friday or Thursday at our executive committee meeting, and you have our contact information, so feel free to reach out at any time. Thanks all.